I thought my new home was a fresh start. But when the old owner called and told me about a hidden camera I never knew existed, I had no idea what I was about to see. What had my son done while I was away? The cardboard boxes stacked against the living room wall looked like brown monuments to my failures. 51 years old, divorced, and moving into a cramped two-bedroom apartment with my 23-year-old son. This wasn't exactly the life trajectory I'd imagined when I was Mason's age. "Dad, where do you want the kitchen stuff?" Mason called from the hallway, his voice echoing off the bare walls. He'd been surprisingly helpful during the move, which should have made me happy. Instead, it made me nervous. Mason being cooperative usually meant he wanted something. "Just set it on the counter for now," I replied, carefully placing my work files into the small desk I'd managed to squeeze into the corner. As a freelance accountant, organization was everything. Even in chaos, I needed my systems. The apartment building was older but well-maintained. Riverside Gardens, they called it, though I hadn't seen any gardens yet. The previous owner, a man named Julian Cobb, had been surprisingly accommodating during the purchase process. He'd even left his contact information, just in case you have questions about the building quirks. Mason appeared in the doorway, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I'm going to head out for a bit. Need to handle some errands." "What kind of errands?" I asked, not looking up from my files. "Just stuff, Dad. I'll be back later." Something in his tone made me glance up. Mason was avoiding eye contact, his hands fidgeting with his car keys. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine. Why wouldn't it be?" His defensive response only heightened my concern, but before I could probe further, he was gone. The silence that followed felt heavy. I walked to the window overlooking the building's courtyard and watched Mason's beat-up Honda disappear around the corner. A woman in her 60s was tending to some potted plants near the building entrance. She looked up and waved when she noticed me watching. I spent the next few hours unpacking, trying to make the place feel like home. The apartment was actually nice. Hardwood floors, decent natural light, and surprisingly quiet for a building in the city. Julian had mentioned that most of the tenants were long-term residents who valued peace and privacy. Around 7 p.m., my phone rang. My ex-wife's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach tightened. "Hello, Jade." "Milo, we need to talk about Mason." I sank into my new couch, still covered in plastic. "What about him?" "He's been acting strange lately, more secretive than usual. And yesterday, when I asked him about his plans, he got really defensive, almost aggressive." "He's 23, Jade. He's allowed to have privacy." "This is different, Milo. I'm worried about what he's getting into. You need to keep an eye on him." After hanging up, I stared at the boxes around me. Jade's concerns weren't unfounded. Mason had always been charming when he wanted something, but there was an entitled streak that had grown worse over the years. He expected things to be handed to him, and when they weren't, his true nature showed. Mason didn't return until after midnight. I heard his key in the lock, followed by hushed voices in the hallway. When I checked, he was alone. "How were the errands?" I asked. "Fine," he said curtly, heading straight to his room. "I'm tired." I noticed his hands were dirty, with what looked like grease under his fingernails. When I asked about it, he just shrugged and closed his bedroom door. That night, I lay awake listening to the building's sounds. Footsteps in the hallway, the hum of the elevator, the occasional car door slamming outside. This was supposed to be our fresh start, but something felt off. The next morning, I decided to introduce myself to some neighbors. The woman I'd seen tending plants was in the lobby, checking her mail. "You must be the new resident in 5C, she said with a warm smile. "I'm Yvette Chow from 4B. Welcome to the building." "Milo Dray, thank you. It seems like a nice place." "Oh, it is. Very quiet, very safe. Julian Cobb, the previous owner of your unit, he kept a close eye on things. Made sure everything ran smoothly." She lowered her voice slightly. "He still watches over the building, you know. Lives in 3A now. Good man to know." We chatted for a few more minutes. Mrs. Chow mentioned that she kept odd hours due to insomnia, so she noticed the comings and goings in the building. "If you ever have concerns about anything, don't hesitate to ask. We neighbors need to look out for each other." That afternoon, while Mason was out again, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Is this Milo Dray?" The voice was older, careful. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Julian Cobb. I sold you the apartment in 5C. We need to talk." "Is there a problem with the sale?" "Not exactly, but there's something I forgot to mention, something important. I need you to come to my apartment, 3A, tonight, around 10 p.m. and Milo, come alone." The call cut off before I could ask questions. I stared at my phone, unease creeping up my spine. What could be so urgent that it couldn't wait until morning? And why did he emphasize coming alone? The rest of the day dragged by. Mason returned around 6, again avoiding details about where he'd been. He seemed agitated, constantly checking his phone and pacing around the apartment. "Everything all right?" I asked during dinner. "Why does everyone keep asking me that?" he snapped. "I'm fine. Can't a guy have some privacy?" At 9:45 p.m., I told Mason I was going for a walk. He barely looked up from his phone. I took the elevator down to the 3rd floor, my heart beating faster than it should have been. Julian Cobb answered his door immediately, as if he'd been waiting. He was a thin man in his late 60s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His apartment was immaculate, with engineering textbooks lining built-in shelves. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to see." He led me to a small office area where a laptop sat open on the desk. "When I lived in your apartment, I had security concerns, packages going missing, strange sounds at night, so I installed a hidden camera in the living room. I forgot to remove it before the sale." A chill swept through me. "You've been recording us?" "Not intentionally. I realized my mistake this morning and was going to retrieve it. But then I saw something on the footage that you need to know about." He clicked play on a video file. The timestamp showed yesterday evening, after I'd gone to bed. The image was clear. My living room, shot from what must have been a tiny camera hidden in a decorative plant I'd assumed came with the apartment. In the video, Mason entered the frame carrying a small toolkit. He went straight to my desk and began rifling through my files. He photographed several documents with his phone, including what looked like bank statements and client information. "Keep watching," Julian said grimly. The video continued. Mason left the apartment and returned 20 minutes later with a woman. She was in her 50s, professionally dressed with short brown hair. They spoke in hushed tones, but the audio was clear enough. "These are perfect," the woman said, examining Mason's phone. "Your father keeps excellent records. This will make everything much easier." "Just remember our deal, Tamsin," Mason replied. 50-50 split, and you handle all the technical stuff." "Of course, but we need to be careful. If he catches on..." "He won't. My dad's too trusting. He still thinks I'm his little boy who needs protecting." They spent another 10 minutes going through my belongings, taking photos of everything from my social security card to my client contracts. Then they left together. I stared at the screen in shock. "Who is that woman?" "Tamsin Voss. She's the building manager. Has been for about 5 years." Julian's expression was grim. "Milo, I think your son is planning something that goes far beyond simple theft. The way they talked, the documents they targeted. This looks like identity fraud setup." "That's impossible. Mason wouldn't..." "I have more footage," Julian interrupted. "This isn't the first time they've met, and it's not just your apartment they've been targeting." He showed me several more clips. Mason and Tamsin in the lobby at 2 a.m., exchanging thick envelopes. Mason using what looked like copied keys to enter the building's mailroom. Tamsin providing him with what appeared to be master keys to other units. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Based on my footage, at least 2 weeks, but I suspect it started before that." Julian leaned forward. "Milo, your son isn't just stealing from you. He's part of something bigger. And if you don't act soon, you're going to be the one who takes the blame when it all comes crashing down." I felt sick. The Mason I thought I knew, irresponsible, yes, but not criminal, was apparently a stranger. "What do I do?" "First, we document everything. I'll copy this footage for you. Second, you need to be very careful about what you say and do around him. If he suspects you know..." Julian didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. I was living with someone who saw me as a mark, not a father. "There's something else," Julian continued. "I've been watching this building for months. Packages disappearing, tenants complaining about missing mail, strange charges showing up on credit cards. I think Tamsin has been running this operation for a while, and Mason is just her newest recruit. He handed me a USB drive. Everything is on here. But Milo, you need to be smart about this. If you confront them directly, they'll just disappear and set up shop somewhere else. You need to build a case that will stick." I took the USB drive with shaking hands. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I was where you are once, trusting someone I shouldn't have. It cost me more than money. It cost me my family." His expression hardened. "Don't let them destroy you the way they're planning to." I returned to my apartment in a daze. Mason was in his room with the door closed, music playing softly. I went to my bedroom and hid the USB drive in my small safe, behind some old tax documents. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every sound from Mason's room made me tense. Was he planning his next move? Was he texting Tamsin about new targets? The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the realization that I'd been completely blind to who my son really was. The signs had been there for years. The entitlement, the manipulation, the way he could turn on the charm when he needed something. I'd made excuses, blamed his behavior on the divorce, on his age, on everything except the truth. Mason wasn't a victim of circumstances. He was a predator who'd been living under my roof, and now he was using me to hurt innocent people. As dawn broke over the city, I made a decision. If Mason wanted to play games, I'd play along. But this time, I'd be the one controlling the board. The next morning, I acted as normal as possible. Mason emerged from his room around 10, looking refreshed and confident. Too confident for someone who'd spent the previous evening committing felonies. "Morning, Dad. Sleep well?" "Like a baby," I lied, buttering my toast with steady hands. "You? Great. Actually, I was thinking of showing you around the building today. Introduce you to some people, help you get settled in." The offer was so transparently manipulative that I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded enthusiastically. "That sounds wonderful. I'd love to meet our neighbors." We started in the lobby. Mason seemed to know everyone, which struck me as odd since we'd only moved in 2 days ago. He introduced me to several tenants, but I noticed he steered me away from the building manager's office. "Is there someone in charge I should meet?" I asked innocently. "You know, for building policies and such?" "Oh, the manager's really busy. I'll introduce you later when she has more time." We took the elevator to the rooftop, which had been converted into a small recreational area with benches and tables. Mason lit a cigarette. When had he started smoking? And leaned against the railing. "Nice view," I commented, looking out over the city. "Yeah, it's peaceful up here. Good place to think, you know?" As if on cue, the elevator dinged and Tamsin Voss stepped onto the rooftop. In daylight, she looked like any professional woman in her 50s, well-dressed, competent, trustworthy, the kind of person you'd instinctively believe. "Mason, there you are," she said, then noticed me. "And you must be Mr. Dray. Welcome to Riverside Gardens." "Thank you. It's a lovely building." We pride ourselves on maintaining a close-knit community here. Mason's been telling me how excited you are to be part of it. The conversation continued for several minutes, all surface-level pleasantries, but I noticed the subtle communication between Mason and Tamsin. Meaningful glances, careful word choices. They were performing for my benefit. When Tamsin excused herself, claiming building management duties, Mason and I returned to the apartment. He immediately went to his room, saying he had some calls to make. I used the opportunity to examine the decorative plant where Julian's camera was hidden. The device was tiny, barely visible among the leaves. Professional grade, not some cheap spy gadget. This operation was more sophisticated than I'd initially realized. That afternoon, I visited the building's maintenance workshop in the basement, following signs I'd noticed during our tour. A man in his 40s was organizing tools, whistling softly to himself. "Excuse me, are you the maintenance supervisor?" He looked up, sizing me up quickly. "Shay Ortiz, you're the new guy in 5C, right?" "Milo Dray, nice to meet you." We shook hands. Shay had calloused palms and direct eyes. Someone who worked with his hands and didn't suffer fools. "Building treating you well so far?" "Very well. Everyone's been so helpful." I paused, then added casually, "My son Mason seems to have made friends quickly." Something shifted in Shay's expression. "Your son, huh?" "Yeah, he's been around a lot lately. Real interested in how things work around here." "Oh?" Shay glanced around, then stepped closer. "Look, I probably shouldn't say anything, but you might want to keep an eye on who's got access to your place. Keys go missing sometimes, if you know what I mean." Before I could respond, he pressed something into my palm, a small ring of old keys. "Some locks don't change as often as they should," he said quietly. "Might want to remember that." That evening, I waited until Mason left for another mysterious errand, then examined the keys Shay had given me. One of them looked like it might fit my apartment lock. When I tested it, the lock turned smoothly. How many people had unauthorized access to my home? I spent the next few hours reviewing the footage Julian had given me, taking detailed notes. The timestamps, the conversations, the documents they'd photographed, everything pointed to a systematic operation designed to steal identities and financial information. But I needed more evidence. Julian's footage was damning, but a good lawyer might argue it was illegally obtained. I needed witnesses, documentation, proof that would hold up under scrutiny. The next day, I took a different approach. I visited the local library and used their computers to print out detailed logs of all my financial accounts. If Mason and Tamsin were planning to use my information, I wanted a clear record of what my finances looked like before they struck. While printing, I noticed several other tenants from my building using the library computers. An elderly man was frantically checking his bank accounts, muttering about unauthorized charges. A middle-aged woman was on the phone with her credit card company, disputing transactions she hadn't made. The pattern was becoming clear. Riverside Gardens wasn't just Mason and Tamsin's hunting ground, it was their established territory. That afternoon, I suggested Mason and I grab coffee at a shop near the building. He agreed readily, probably thinking it was another opportunity to manipulate me. "I have to say, I'm impressed by how quickly you've adapted to the building," I said once we were seated. "You seem to know everyone already." Mason's chest puffed up slightly. "I'm good with people, Dad. Always have been. It's about knowing who matters, who can help you get things done." "Such as?" "Well, like Tamsin. She runs the building, but she also understands that sometimes the rules need to be flexible for the right people." "Flexible how?" Mason leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Let's just say that when you know the right people, doors open that stay closed for everyone else. Opportunities present themselves." I felt sick listening to him, but I kept my expression neutral. "That's very wise of you." "The thing is, Dad, most people are too honest for their own good. They follow rules that were written by people who don't follow them. Smart people understand that success requires creativity." "And you consider yourself smart?" "I consider myself realistic. The world doesn't owe us anything, but that doesn't mean we can't take what we need." When we returned to the building, I found a note slipped under my door. It was from Mrs. Chow. "Mr. Dray, I hope you don't mind, but I noticed your son has been receiving packages at odd hours. They're usually picked up by a woman I don't recognize. I thought you should know. Yvette." I crumpled the note and threw it away, but not before Mason saw me reading it. "What was that about?" he asked. "Nothing important. Mrs. Chow was just welcoming us to the building." But Mason's expression had changed. The easy confidence was replaced by something sharper, more calculating. "She's a nosy old woman. You shouldn't encourage her." That night, I heard Mason on the phone in his room. I couldn't make out all the words, but the tone was urgent, almost panicked. I caught fragments. "Think she saw something. And need to move faster." The next morning, I woke to find my apartment door slightly ajar. I was certain I'd locked it the night before. A quick check revealed that several items on my desk had been moved slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, but I'd developed a habit of precise organization over the years. Someone had been in my apartment while I slept. I checked my safe. The USB drive was still there, but the lock showed tiny scratch marks that hadn't been there before. Someone had tried to open it. That afternoon, I called Julian from a payphone outside the building. "They know something's wrong," I told him. "Mason's getting suspicious, and I think they tried to break into my safe last night." "Then we need to move faster," Julian replied. "I have more footage from last night. Can you come over this evening?" "What kind of footage?" "The kind that shows exactly how deep this goes. And Milo, it's worse than we thought." When I arrived at Julian's apartment that evening, his expression was grim. "Before I show you this, I need you to understand something. What you're about to see isn't just about theft or fraud. It's about systematic exploitation of vulnerable people." He pulled up a new video file. This one showed the building's mailroom at 3 a.m. Mason and Tamsin were there with a third person I didn't recognize, a young woman with multiple piercings and a laptop. "That's Rena Veller," Julian explained. "She's a hacker, specializes in identity theft and financial fraud." In the video, they were opening mail, photographing documents, and entering information into Rena's laptop. But what made my stomach turn was their casual attitude. They were laughing, joking, treating it like a game. "How many people are they targeting?" I asked. "Based on what I've seen, at least a dozen tenants in this building alone. But I think this is just one location. They're probably running similar operations in other buildings." Julian showed me more footage. Mason using copied keys to enter other apartments while tenants were at work, Tamsin providing building access codes, Rena setting up fake credit accounts using stolen information. "The sophistication level suggests this has been going on for months, maybe years," Julian continued. "They're not amateur criminals, Milo. They're professionals." "Then why involve Mason? He's not exactly criminal mastermind material." "Because he's perfect cover. Young, charming, lives with his respectable accountant father. If anyone gets suspicious, he looks like a kid who got in over his head, not a career criminal." The realization hit me like a physical blow. They're planning to frame me. I think so, yes. Your professional credentials, your access to financial documents, your position of trust with clients. You'd make an ideal fall guy. Mason probably gets a light sentence for being influenced by his father, while you take the blame for everything. I stared at the frozen video image of my son casually rifling through a stranger's mail. What do I do? We build a case that's absolutely bulletproof. Documentation, witnesses, evidence chains that can't be disputed. And we do it fast before they realize how much we know. Julian handed me a business card. This is Lana Greer. She's a lawyer who specializes in elder fraud and tenant rights. I've already spoken to her about the general situation. Call her tomorrow. Can we trust her? She's the one who helped me when I was in a similar situation 5 years ago. She's discreet, thorough, and she doesn't like people who prey on vulnerable populations. As I prepared to leave, Julian grabbed my arm. Milo, from this point forward, assume everything you do is being watched. Don't change your behavior dramatically, but be careful. If they realize we're on to them... What? People who run operations this sophisticated don't just disappear quietly. They eliminate threats. I returned to my apartment to find Mason waiting in the living room, looking agitated. Where were you? He demanded. Taking a walk. I needed some fresh air. For 2 hours? I forced myself to remain calm. I ended up chatting with some neighbors. Time got away from me. Mason studied my face carefully. Dad, I hope you're not getting too friendly with people in this building. Some of them aren't what they seem. What do you mean? Just be careful who you trust. Not everyone has your best interests at heart. The irony of the statement was almost unbearable. I nodded seriously. I appreciate the warning. I'll be careful. That night, I lay awake listening to every sound in the apartment. Around 2 a.m., I heard my bedroom door creak open slightly. Through barely opened eyes, I watched Mason's silhouette in the doorway. He stood there for several minutes, just watching me. Finally, he retreated, closing the door silently behind him. I was living with a predator who was deciding whether I'd outlived my usefulness. The next morning, I called Lana Greer from the library. Her voice was professional but warm, with an underlying steel that suggested she didn't intimidate easily. Julian briefed me on the general situation, she said. I'd like to meet with you as soon as possible. But Mr. Dray, I need you to understand something up front. If we're going to build a case that will stick, you need to be completely honest with me about everything, no matter how embarrassing or painful. We arranged to meet at her office that afternoon. I told Mason I was handling some banking issues related to the move, which wasn't entirely untrue. Lana's law office was in a converted brownstone downtown. She was a woman in her mid-40s with graying hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. Her office walls were covered with certificates and photos of her with various community leaders. Before we begin, she said, I need to know, are you prepared to see this through to the end? Because once we start building a formal case, there's no going back. Your son will face serious criminal charges. He's already committed serious crimes, I replied. The question is whether I'm going to be his victim or his father. Lana nodded approvingly. Good. That's the mindset we need. She opened a thick folder. Julian provided me with copies of the video evidence. It's compelling, but we need to build a broader case. Video alone can be disputed. She walked me through what we'd need. Witness statements, financial records, documentation of the fraud pattern, and most importantly, evidence that couldn't be dismissed as circumstantial. I'm going to be blunt, Lana continued. Your son and his associates are running a sophisticated identity theft ring. The evidence suggests they've stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past year. This isn't petty theft, it's organized crime. How do we prove it? Methodically. We document every transaction, every victim, every piece of evidence. We build a timeline that shows premeditation and coordination, and we do it without alerting them to what we're doing. Lana handed me a list of tasks. I need you to gather your financial records for the past 6 months. Bank statements, credit reports, client information, everything. We need to establish a baseline before they strike. You think they haven't used my information yet? I think they're building up to something big. Your professional credentials make you valuable, but they also make you dangerous to them. They need to time this perfectly to maximize their gain while minimizing their risk. Over the next few days, I threw myself into evidence gathering with the same methodical approach I use for complex tax returns. Every detail mattered, every document could be crucial. I discovered that my credit card had been used for small, seemingly innocuous purchases over the past week. A coffee here, a magazine there. Nothing large enough to trigger fraud alerts, but clear evidence that someone had access to my financial information. When I mentioned this to Mason, he seemed genuinely surprised. "That's weird, Dad. You should probably call the credit card company." His acting was flawless. If I hadn't seen the video footage, I would have believed his concern was genuine. I also started paying closer attention to the other tenants in the building. Mrs. Chow mentioned that her neighbor in 4A had been having trouble with unauthorized charges. An elderly man in 2B was dealing with a mysteriously drained savings account. The pattern was becoming clear, but I needed more than patterns. I needed proof. That's when I had an idea that was either brilliant or incredibly dangerous. I decided to set a trap. Working with Lana's guidance, I created a fake document, a client list with detailed financial information for several fictitious wealthy individuals. I made sure it looked authentic, complete with letterhead and professional formatting. Then I left it in my desk drawer, positioned so it would be clearly visible to anyone searching through my files. "This is risky," Lana warned. "If they use this information and it leads back to you—" "It won't," I assured her. "The accounts are fake. The people don't exist. But if they try to use the information, we'll have proof of intent." The trap was set on a Wednesday evening. I made sure to mention to Mason that I'd be working late at the library the next day, giving him a clear window of opportunity. Thursday afternoon, I positioned myself in the library with a clear view of the building entrance. At 2:47 p.m., I saw Mason enter with Tamsin and the woman Julian had identified as Rena Veller. I waited an hour, then called my apartment phone from the library. No answer, which meant they were still inside. When I returned to the apartment that evening, everything looked normal, but I'd placed tiny pieces of tape on my desk drawers in positions only I would notice. The tape on the drawer containing the fake document had been moved. They'd taken the bait. The next morning, I received a call from Lana. "We have a problem," she said. "Someone attempted to open credit accounts using information from your fake document. The banks flagged them as suspicious because the social security numbers don't exist." "That's good, right? We have proof they're using stolen information." "Yes, but it also means they know something's wrong. Your son is about to realize he's been set up." She was right. When Mason returned home that afternoon, his demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the casual confidence, replaced by barely controlled paranoia. "Dad, we need to talk," he said, closing the apartment door behind him. "What about?" "About why you're trying to frame me." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The document in your desk, the one with the fake client information, did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" There was no point in pretending anymore. "When did you become a criminal, Mason?" "When did you become a narc?" he shot back. "I'm your son. You're supposed to protect me, not set traps for me." "I'm supposed to protect innocent people from criminals, even when the criminal is my son." Mason's mask slipped completely. The charming young man disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, old man. This is bigger than you think, and the people involved don't appreciate interference." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning. Back off, or you'll regret it." That night, I called Julian from a payphone. "They know," I told him. "Mason figured out the trap. Then we need to move fast. How much evidence do we have?" "Enough to prove fraud, but maybe not enough to prove the full scope of the operation." "Meet me tomorrow morning. I have something that might change that." The next day, Julian showed me a new set of files on his computer. "I've been working with Shay, the maintenance supervisor. He's been documenting every unusual access to the building, every suspicious repair request, every time master keys have gone missing." The documentation was extensive. Shay had been keeping detailed logs for months, recording times, dates, and descriptions of suspicious activities. Combined with Julian's video evidence, it painted a picture of systematic criminal enterprise. "There's more," Julian continued. "Shay found something in the building's basement storage area." He showed me photos Shay had taken with his phone. Hidden behind old maintenance equipment was a box containing dozens of credit cards, fake IDs, and printed documents with tenant information. "We need to call the police," I said. "Not yet. If we call them now, Mason and his associates will just claim they were framed. We need to catch them in the act of using this stuff." "How?" Julian smiled grimly. "Shay has a plan." The plan was simple, but risky. Shay would accidentally mention to Tamsin that a new tenant was moving into the building, a wealthy widow with poor eyesight and no family nearby. The perfect target for their operation. Of course, the widow didn't exist, but if Mason and his team took the bait, they'd be caught on camera attempting to victimize someone who wasn't there. We set the trap for the following Tuesday. I made sure to be out of the building, establishing an alibi at the library. Julian positioned himself to monitor his hidden cameras. Shay arranged to be working late in the basement. At 8:30 p.m., Julian called me. "They took the bait. Mason, Tamsin, and Rena are in the building. They just used master keys to enter the apartment that's supposed to belong to the fake widow. What are they doing? Searching for financial documents, photographing everything they can find. But here's the beautiful part. The apartment is completely empty. They're on camera breaking into an unoccupied unit based on fake information. 20 minutes later, Julian called again. They're leaving. But Milo... They looked angry when they realized the apartment was empty. I think they know this was another trap. I spent that night in a hotel, not trusting that Mason wouldn't do something drastic when he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. The next morning, Lana called with news. We have enough evidence to file charges. The combination of the video footage, the financial fraud attempts, the break-in, and Shay's documentation gives us a solid case. What happens now? Now we turn everything over to the police and let the justice system do its job. But Milo, you need to be prepared for what comes next. Mason is going to face serious prison time. I thought about the son I'd raised, the little boy who used to bring me drawings from school and ask for help with his homework. That child was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as nothing more than a convenient target. I understand, I told Lana. Do what needs to be done. Detective Petra Solis was nothing like what I'd expected. She was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of the best accountants I'd worked with, people who could spot discrepancies others missed. Mr. Dray, she said, settling into the chair across from Lana's desk, I've reviewed the evidence you've provided. It's extensive. We were meeting in Lana's office on a Friday morning. Julian sat beside me, his own folder of documentation in his lap. Detective Solis had been working fraud cases for over a decade, and Lana assured me she was someone who wouldn't be swayed by emotional appeals or legal technicalities. Before we proceed, Detective Solis continued, I need to make sure you understand what you're alleging. You're accusing your son of running an organized identity theft ring that has victimized dozens of people and stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm not alleging anything, I replied. I'm providing evidence of what he's done. Detective Solis opened her laptop and began reviewing the video files Julian had provided. Her expression remained neutral as she watched Mason and his associates breaking into apartments, stealing mail, and photographing personal documents. The video evidence is compelling, she said finally. But I need to ask, how was this footage obtained? Julian leaned forward. I installed security cameras in my own apartment for legitimate safety concerns. The cameras in common areas are positioned in publicly accessible spaces. Everything was recorded legally. And the apartment break-ins? Recorded from cameras positioned in my apartment, which shares a wall with the units in question. The cameras captured criminal activity taking place in areas visible from my legal vantage point. Detective Solis nodded slowly. She'd obviously dealt with evidence admissibility issues before. What about the financial fraud attempts? Lana handed her a thick folder. Mr. Dray documented every unauthorized use of his financial information. We also have bank records showing the attempted account openings using fake information Mr. Dray created as part of a controlled investigation. You mean entrapment? We mean providing an opportunity for criminals to commit crimes they were already committing, Lana corrected. Mr. Dray didn't induce his son to become a criminal. He simply documented ongoing criminal activity. Detective Solis spent the next hour reviewing documents, asking detailed questions about timelines, evidence collection, and witness statements. Her thoroughness was both reassuring and terrifying. If she was this careful with our evidence, she'd be equally careful with any defense Mason's lawyers might present. I have enough to open a formal investigation, she said finally. But Mr. Dray, I need you to understand something. Once I file these charges, your son will be arrested. There's no going back. I understand. Do you? Because in my experience, parents who turn in their children often have regrets later. The justice system doesn't care about family relationships. If your son is convicted, he's looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. The weight of that statement settled over me. 5 to 10 years. Mason would be in his 30s when he got out, assuming he got out. His life, as he knew it, would be over. But then I thought about Mrs. Chow, worried about her missing packages, about the elderly man in 2B who'd lost his life savings, about all the victims I didn't even know about yet. Detective, I said, my son made his choices. Now I'm making mine. She nodded approvingly. Then let's do this right. The plan was for Detective Solis to coordinate with building security to gather additional evidence while I returned to my normal routine. The goal was to catch Mason and his associates in the act of committing new crimes, providing fresh evidence that couldn't be disputed. How long will this take? I asked. Not long. Based on the pattern you've documented, they're operating on a regular schedule. We should have what we need within a week. But Mason was smarter than we'd given him credit for. When I returned to the apartment that afternoon, he was waiting for me with a suitcase packed. "Going somewhere?" I asked. "We're going somewhere, Dad, both of us. I think we need a little vacation." "I can't just leave. I have clients, responsibilities." Mason's smile was cold. "Your responsibilities have changed. Right now, your responsibility is to keep your mouth shut and do exactly what I tell you." "And if I don't?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was Mrs. Chow, taken with a telephoto lens as she worked in her garden. Accidents happen to nosy old ladies, especially ones who can't mind their own business. The threat was clear. Mason wasn't just a thief anymore. He was willing to hurt innocent people to protect his operation. "You're threatening Mrs. Chow?" "I'm explaining reality. You've been asking a lot of questions, Dad. Talking to a lot of people. That makes people nervous. Nervous people make bad decisions." I realized that Mason had been watching me just as carefully as I'd been watching him. He knew about my meetings with Julian, probably knew about Lana, maybe even knew about Detective Solis. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want you to pack a bag. We're going to take a nice trip to Canada, just until things settle down here." "And if I refuse?" Mason showed me another photo on his phone. This one was of Julian entering his apartment building. "Your friend Julian has been very helpful with his little camera setup. It would be a shame if someone broke into his apartment while he was sleeping." The casual way Mason discussed using force was more unsettling than any shouting or dramatic threats could have been. This wasn't emotional. It was business. "How long have you known," I asked, "about your little investigation? Since the beginning. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you sneaking around, taking mysterious phone calls, meeting with lawyers?" Mason laughed. "Dad, I've been playing this game a lot longer than you have." "Then why didn't you stop me sooner?" "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go. I needed to know if you were really going to betray your own son." His expression hardened. "Now I know." Mason gave me 30 minutes to pack. While I threw clothes into a suitcase, my mind raced through options. I could try to call Detective Solis, but Mason was watching me too closely. I could refuse to go, but that would put Mrs. Chow and Julian in danger. Or I could play along and hope an opportunity presented itself. "Ready?" Mason asked, shouldering his own bag. "Ready." We took the elevator down to the lobby. Mason's hand rested casually on my shoulder, but I could feel the tension in his grip. To anyone watching, we looked like father and son heading out on a trip together. Mrs. Chow was in the lobby, checking her mail. She smiled and waved as we passed. "Have a nice trip, Mr. Dray," she called. "Thank you," I replied, hoping it wouldn't be the last time I saw her alive. Mason had a car waiting outside, not his usual Honda, but a black sedan with tinted windows. Tamsin was in the driver's seat, her expression grim. "Everything ready?" she asked as we got in. "Ready," Mason confirmed. "Dad's decided to be cooperative." As we pulled away from the building, I saw Julian watching from his third-floor window. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw him reach for his phone. Maybe Detective Solis would realize something was wrong when I missed our scheduled check-in. Maybe Julian's footage would provide enough evidence to proceed without me. Maybe Mrs. Chow would notice I hadn't returned and ask questions. Or maybe I was about to disappear permanently, another victim of my son's criminal enterprise. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere quiet," Tamsin replied. "Somewhere you can think about the importance of family loyalty." Mason turned in his seat to face me. "Here's what's going to happen, Dad. You're going to call your lawyer friend and tell her you made a mistake. You're going to say you misunderstood what you saw, that you were confused and emotional after the divorce. And if I don't? Then you're going to have a very unfortunate accident, and so will anyone else who's been helping you." We drove in silence for the next hour, heading north out of the city. The landscape gradually changed from urban to suburban to rural. Tamsin turned off the main highway onto a series of increasingly isolated back roads. Finally, we pulled up to a small cabin surrounded by dense woods. There were no other buildings visible, no neighbors who might hear screams or notice suspicious activity. "Home sweet home," Mason said cheerfully. "At least for the next few days." The cabin was spartanly furnished but clean. Someone had prepared for our arrival. There was food in the refrigerator, fresh linens on the beds, and most importantly, no phone service. "Make yourself comfortable, Dad," Mason said. "Tomorrow you're going to make some very important phone calls." That night, I lay awake in the small bedroom they'd assigned me, listening to Mason and Tamsin talking in low voices in the main room. I caught fragments of their conversation, something about cleaning up loose ends and permanent solutions. I thought about the choices that had led me to this moment, every decision to trust Mason, every excuse I'd made for his behavior, every time I'd chosen to see the son I wanted him to be instead of the person he actually was. But I also thought about Detective Solis, about Julian's hidden cameras, about the evidence we'd so carefully assembled. Even if something happened to me, the case against Mason and his associates was solid. That realization brought me a strange kind of peace. Whatever happened next, I'd done the right thing. I'd chosen justice over family loyalty, truth over comfortable lies. Around 3 a.m., I heard a car engine outside. Through the small bedroom window, I saw headlights approaching through the trees. A second vehicle had arrived. I heard voices, then footsteps on the cabin's porch. The front door opened, and someone new entered. A man's voice I didn't recognize. "Is he secure?" the new voice asked. "Completely," Mason replied. "But we have a problem. He's already talked to the police." "How much do they know?" "Too much. We need to accelerate the timeline." "What about the others? The old man with the cameras, the lawyer?" "Already being handled," Tamsin said. "By tomorrow morning, this whole thing will be cleaned up." I felt sick. Julian and Lana were in danger because of my investigation. I'd tried to do the right thing, but I'd put innocent people at risk. The conversation continued for another hour, but I couldn't make out all the details. What I did understand was that Mason's operation was much larger than I'd realized, involving multiple buildings and dozens of victims across several states. I also understood that I wasn't going to survive this. But as dawn broke over the isolated cabin, I heard something that changed everything. The distant sound of helicopter rotors. The helicopter sound grew louder, accompanied by the rumble of multiple vehicles approaching through the forest. I pressed my face to the bedroom window and saw black SUVs emerging from the tree line, followed by officers in tactical gear. "FBI, federal agents," the voice boomed through a megaphone. "Exit the building with your hands visible." The cabin erupted in chaos. I heard Mason swearing, Tamsin shouting something about escape routes, and the unknown man demanding to know how they'd been found. Through my bedroom door, I heard Mason's voice, high and panicked. "This is impossible. How did they find us?" "Shut up and think," Tamsin snapped. "There has to be another way out of here." "The old man," the unknown voice said. "He must have had more cameras than we knew about. We should have dealt with him earlier." A chill ran through me. Julian had been their target, but somehow he'd survived long enough to lead authorities to us. "Final warning," the megaphone boomed. "Exit now or we're coming in." I heard frantic movement in the main room, then Mason's voice outside my door. Dad, we need to talk." The door burst open, and Mason rushed in, his face flushed with desperation. Behind him, I could see Tamsin and a thin man in his 40s I didn't recognize. "You set us up," Mason accused. "You led them here somehow." "I've been locked in this room all night," I replied calmly. "How could I have contacted anyone?" "The lawyer, the old man, someone tipped them off." Mason grabbed my arm. "You're going to get us out of this. Tell them you were kidnapped, that you were forced to make false accusations." "No." The simple words seemed to hit Mason like a physical blow. "What?" I said no. "I'm not going to help you escape justice." Mason's face contorted with rage. "You're my father. You're supposed to protect me." "I tried to protect you for 23 years. I made excuses for you, cleaned up your messes, and ignored the warning signs. All I did was enable you to become this." I gestured toward the window, where tactical officers were taking positions around the cabin. "This is who you chose to be, Mason. Now face the consequences." The thin man I didn't recognize pulled a gun from his jacket. "We don't have time for family therapy. If the old man won't cooperate, we eliminate him and fight our way out." "Put the gun down, Carl," Tamsin said sharply. "Shooting a hostage will only make this worse." "Worse? We're looking at life sentences. How much worse can it get?" Through the window, I could see FBI agents moving closer to the cabin. Their coordination was precise, professional. These weren't local police who might be fooled or intimidated. These were federal agents with resources and training. "Last chance," the megaphone announced. "Come out now." Mason looked around desperately, then focused on me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure hatred. "This is all your fault," he said. "If you'd just minded your own business, if you'd just been a good father and protected your family, none of this would have happened." "If I'd been a good father," I replied, "I would have stopped you years ago." Carl raised his gun toward me, but before he could pull the trigger, the cabin's front door exploded inward. FBI agents poured through the opening, shouting commands and moving with practiced efficiency. Get down, hands where we can see them." The next few minutes were a blur of tactical gear, shouted orders, and the sound of handcuffs clicking into place. Carl dropped his gun and surrendered immediately. Tamsin tried to run toward the back of the cabin, but was tackled by 2 agents before she reached the door. Mason, in a final act of defiance, lunged toward me as if he could somehow use me as a human shield. Instead, he found himself face down on the floor with an FBI agent's knee in his back. Milo Dray? One of the agents, a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair, approached me carefully. I'm Special Agent Jade Torres. Are you injured? I'm fine, I said, though my hands were shaking. How did you find us? Your friend Julian Cobb has been very helpful. He's been tracking this operation for months, and when you disappeared, he provided us with everything he had. As the agents processed the scene, I learned more about how the rescue had come together. Julian hadn't just been recording Mason's activities, he'd been building a comprehensive case against the entire criminal network. When Detective Solis realized I'd missed our check-in, she'd contacted Julian, who revealed the full scope of his surveillance operation. The hidden cameras in his apartment had captured not just Mason's crimes, but also conversations between the conspirators that revealed the location of their safe house. Julian had been feeding information to law enforcement for weeks, waiting for the right moment to spring the trap. Your son and his associates are part of a multi-state identity theft ring, Agent Torres explained as we walked toward one of the FBI vehicles. They've victimized over 200 people and stolen more than $3 million. $3 million? I was stunned. I had no idea it was that extensive. Most of the victims didn't realize they'd been targeted until it was too late. Your son's group specialized in slow, methodical theft that flew under the radar of fraud detection systems. As we reached the vehicle, I turned back to see Mason being led to a separate FBI van. Our eyes met one last time, and I saw no remorse, no recognition of wrongdoing, only anger at being caught. "Dad," he called out, "this isn't over. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started." Agent Torres gently guided me into the back seat of her vehicle. He's going to face federal charges in multiple jurisdictions. With the evidence we have, he's looking at 25 years minimum. 25 years. Mason would be nearly 50 when he got out, if he got out. His entire adult life would be spent in prison. I should have felt sad, or guilty, or conflicted about my son's fate. Instead, I felt relieved. The nightmare was finally over. The federal courthouse in downtown was an imposing building of granite and glass, designed to inspire respect for the law. As I walked up the steps 6 months after that night in the cabin, I reflected on how much had changed. The media had dubbed it the Riverside Gardens conspiracy, though the criminal network had extended far beyond my apartment building. Mason, Tamsin, Carl, and 12 other conspirators had been indicted on charges ranging from identity theft to money laundering to conspiracy to commit fraud. "Ready for this?" Lana asked as we approached the courthouse entrance. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. Today was sentencing day. Mason had pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more of his crimes. His plea agreement called for 22 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. Inside the courthouse, the gallery was packed. I recognized several faces from Riverside Gardens, Mrs. Chow, Shea Ortiz, and other tenants who had been victimized by the conspiracy. Julian sat in the front row, his expression calm but watchful. There were also faces I didn't recognize, victims from other buildings, other cities, people whose lives had been upended by Mason's greed. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Varick presiding. Judge Varick was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and penetrating eyes. She'd built a reputation for fair but firm sentencing, particularly in white-collar crime cases. "Be seated," she said, settling behind the bench. "We're here today for sentencing in the matter of United States versus Mason Dray and others. Before I impose sentence, I'd like to hear from the victims." One by one, people stood to address the court. Mrs. Chow spoke about the violation of trust, how Mason had used his charm to gain access to her personal information. An elderly man from another building described losing his life savings and having to move in with his daughter. A young mother talked about the credit damage that had cost her a home loan. Each story was a reminder of the human cost of Mason's crimes. These weren't faceless corporations or government agencies. They were real people whose lives had been damaged by his actions. Finally, Judge Varick called my name. "Mr. Dray, as the defendant's father, you have the right to address the court before sentencing. Do you wish to do so?" I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. Mason sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, flanked by his court-appointed attorneys. He refused to look at me. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. "I want to thank the court for allowing me to speak. I also want to thank the FBI, Detective Solis, and everyone who worked to bring this conspiracy to light." I paused, gathering my thoughts. I've struggled with what to say today. Part of me wants to ask for mercy for my son, to point out that he's young and could potentially be rehabilitated, but that would be dishonest. Mason's head turned slightly, though he still wouldn't meet my eyes. The truth is, my son made deliberate choices to hurt innocent people. He showed no remorse when confronted with his crimes. Even when arrested, his only concern was avoiding consequences, not making amends to his victims. My voice grew stronger. I spent years making excuses for Mason's behavior, telling myself he just needed guidance or understanding. What he actually needed was accountability. By failing to provide that, I enabled him to become the person sitting at that table today. I turned to face the gallery full of victims. I can't undo the harm my son has caused, but I can promise you this. I will spend the rest of my life working to help victims of identity theft and fraud. I will use my skills as an accountant to help people rebuild their financial lives after being victimized. Finally, I looked directly at Mason. I love you, son, but I can't protect you from the consequences of your choices anymore. I hope someday you'll understand that justice isn't punishment, it's accountability. I sat down to absolute silence. Judge Varick nodded approvingly, then turned to Mason. Mr. Dray, do you wish to address the court before sentencing? Mason stood slowly, his lawyers flanking him. For a moment, I thought he might finally show some remorse, some recognition of the harm he'd caused. Instead, he said, Your Honor, I was led astray by older, more experienced criminals. I was young and impressionable, and I made mistakes. I ask for the court's mercy in recognition of my age and my potential for rehabilitation. It was exactly what I'd expected. No acceptance of responsibility, no apology to his victims, just an attempt to minimize his culpability. Judge Varick studied Mason for a long moment. Mr. Dray, I've reviewed the evidence in this case extensively. The prosecution has presented clear proof that you were not a minor player led astray by others. You were, in fact, one of the primary organizers of this conspiracy. She opened a thick folder. The evidence shows you recruited other participants, planned criminal activities, and showed sophisticated knowledge of fraud techniques. Your actions were deliberate, calculated, and designed to cause maximum harm to vulnerable victims. Mason's confident expression began to crack. Furthermore, Judge Varick continued, your complete lack of remorse, both during these proceedings and in your statement today, demonstrates that you pose a continuing threat to society. She closed the folder and looked directly at Mason. The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 20 years. You will also pay restitution in the amount of $847,000 to your victims. Mason's legs buckled, and his lawyers had to steady him. 25 years, 3 more than the plea agreement had specified. Your Honor, one of his lawyers protested. The plea agreement called for 22 years. The plea agreement was contingent on the defendant's cooperation and demonstration of remorse, Judge Varick replied. Since Mr. Dray has shown neither, I am imposing the sentence I deem appropriate under federal guidelines. As the bailiffs moved to escort Mason from the courtroom, he finally looked at me. His expression was no longer angry or defiant. It was broken, defeated. Dad, he called out as the bailiffs led him away. Dad, please. But there was nothing left to say. Mason had made his choices, and now he would live with the consequences. After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse with Julian, Lana, and Detective Solis. The media had gathered, hoping for statements, but I had no interest in talking to reporters. How do you feel? Julian asked. Relieved, I said honestly. For the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe again. Detective Solis shook my hand. You did the right thing, Mr. Dray. I know it wasn't easy. Actually, I said, it was easier than I expected. Once I stopped thinking of him as my son and started thinking of him as a criminal who happened to be related to me, the choice was clear. Lana handed me a business card. I meant what I said in court about helping fraud victims. If you're serious about that, I know some organizations that could use your expertise. I took the card. I'm serious. It's the least I can do. As we walked down the courthouse steps, Mrs. Chow approached me. She was wearing her best dress and carried a small bouquet of flowers. Mr. Dray, she said, I wanted to thank you. I know this couldn't have been easy. Thank you, Mrs. Chow. I'm sorry you had to go through any of this. She smiled. You protected us, even when it meant turning against your own family. That takes real courage. That evening, I returned to my apartment in Riverside Gardens. The building felt different now, lighter, safer. Tamsin had been replaced by a new manager who actually performed background checks on tenants. Security had been upgraded, and there was a new sense of community among the residents. I found a package waiting outside my door. Inside was a small security camera, a legitimate one, with a note from Julian. For peace of mind, though I don't think you'll need it anymore. I set up the camera in my living room, not because I was worried about intruders, but because I wanted a record of my new life. A life where I chose truth over comfort, justice over family loyalty, and accountability over enabling. 6 months later, I received a letter from Mason. It was the first communication I'd had from him since the sentencing. The return address showed he was being held at a federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. The letter was short. Dad, I've had a lot of time to think. I'm not ready to apologize yet, but I wanted you to know I understand why you did what you did. Maybe someday I'll be able to admit you were right. The other inmates here have heard my story. Most of them think you're either a hero or a traitor. I'm still trying to figure out which one you are. Mason. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. Maybe someday Mason would find genuine remorse. Maybe he'd use his time in prison to become a better person. Maybe he'd eventually understand that accountability wasn't punishment, it was the first step toward redemption. But that was his journey to make. Mine was already clear. I'd kept my promise to help fraud victims rebuild their lives. Working with Lana's organization, I'd helped dozens of people untangle the financial damage caused by identity theft. It was satisfying work, using my skills to heal rather than enable harm. I'd also started speaking at conferences about recognizing and reporting financial fraud. My story resonated with other parents who'd struggled with adult children making destructive choices. The most common question I received was, "How could you turn in your own son?" My answer was always the same. I didn't turn in my son. I turned in a criminal who happened to be my son. There's a difference. 1 year after Mason's sentencing, I received a call from Detective Solis. "Milo, I thought you'd want to know. We just arrested 3 more members of Mason's network. They'd set up operations in Florida and were using the same techniques your son pioneered." "How did you find them?" "Information Mason provided. He's finally started cooperating with authorities. Apparently prison has given him some perspective on the value of cooperation." Maybe that was the beginning of Mason's redemption, maybe not. Either way, it wasn't my responsibility anymore. That evening, I sat on my apartment balcony, watching the sunset over the city. Mrs. Chow was in her garden below, tending to flowers that had bloomed beautifully in the spring warmth. Julian was on his own balcony, reading a book and occasionally waving to neighbors. Shay emerged from the building's maintenance entrance, having finished another day of honest work keeping the building running smoothly. These were good people, honest people who deserved to feel safe in their homes. By choosing to protect them instead of protecting Mason, I'd discovered something important about myself. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, and for the first time in years, I was proud of the choices I'd made. My phone buzzed with a text message from Lana. "New case tomorrow. Elderly woman, $50,000 stolen. Can you help?" I typed back immediately. "On my way." This was my life now, using my skills to help rather than enable, choosing justice over comfort, protecting the innocent instead of shielding the guilty. It was a better life than I'd ever expected to have.